This is Timothy Carroll from Carroll Consultancy Group, and we have back again our legendary health expert, Matt Wallden, osteopath, naturopath, works for some of the best football teams in the world, and is traveling the world lecturing on osteopathy and health. Has a fabulous podcast. What's the name of your podcast again, Matt?
It's FC2O, as in from chaos to order.
That's right. Yeah, and that's what we want in this COVID-19 world.
We do.
Which brings us to our topic. So today we're going to be discussing stress and the stresses that have come from remote working, being at home, the stress of threats on our health, threats on families' lives, and people's lives. So I really felt that this was an important topic. I personally myself have noticed, in May, how stress has been affecting me with several events that have been happening, and the constant lockdowns here in the Bahamas, which are now being released, which is amazing. Mm-hmm. But I thought to myself, it can't be just me. And I did some research and had a look into it and saw that, stress was going through the roof. That and you mentioned to me that suicide calls to hotlines were up 600% in the UK. I was watching a Gallup webinar, and they were saying for every 1% increase in unemployment, there's a 1% increase in suicide rates. So so I was like, wow, let's get Matt back here, and we can have a chat about stress. So first and foremost, why don't you try and give us an understanding of how stress, what is stress and how does it really work? Because, just to get the understanding of stressors and the impact on the body, and the stress load. Mm-hmm. So, it'd be great to get your opinion, just your an understanding for us on what is stress really.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. So, well, I think one little quote so the guy who coined the term stress was a guy called Hans Selye, and that was back in, I believe, the 1950s. It was a while back, but he famously said that the complete absence of stress is death. So, So we often see stress as a negative thing, but of course it's a positive thing as well. And we know that from, if you want to get fitter, then you have to stress the body. If you want to get stronger, you have to stress the body. But it's getting the right level of stress. And so what our physiology tries to do, all day long, all night long, is to maintain balance within the system. So whether you're eating, it'll try and balance best so that you can digest. If you're exercising, it'll try and recalibrate everything so that you can get the blood to the muscles away from the digestive system, and balance the physiology whilst you're exercising. So stress is a normal part of life, but when we get excessive stress in any one system, or in all systems, then of course that creates distress, and we go technically from a state that's termed homeostasis, which is where you're in balance, into what's called allostasis, which means you've moved into another sort of status, if you like, and that's the experience we have when we're under a lot of pressure from deadlines, emotional stress from relationship challenges or financial challenges. And also if we do things like we over-exercise or we overeat, that creates stress on the system. This is why, you often feel groggy and tired around Christmas time, or other, festivals and celebrations, because you overindulge, you overeat, you overdrink, and that creates stress on the system, So stress comes in myriad forms, and generally considered there's 6 major types of stressor. So there's physical stressors. So obviously within that we'd have exercise would be an obvious one, but gravity itself is a physical stressor. And you can see, if you've watched the news and seen astronauts or cosmonauts returning from space, and they can barely walk because they've not been in the gravitational fields. Well, that's a good example of we can see how we're well adapted for the stress of gravity. And the moment we go into a zero gravity environment, we start to decondition for that environment, and then we can't handle the stresses of gravity when we get back to Earth. So Now, those are examples of physical stresses. And the interesting thing about stress is you can have too little stress. So again, too little exercise is a problem, or too little gravity is a problem. But you can also have too much. So, you know, if we were to go to Jupiter, the gravity there would be so strong, they would just crush us. You know, we'd barely be able to stand up because we'd be pulled towards the center of the planet that much stronger, or, you know, which, you know, I'm actually not into my planetary physics so much. I'm trying to think, is Jupiter actually a gaseous planet or not? But you get the point. You know, a planet with a bigger mass has a stronger gravitational field. Or you could, you know, use the example of if someone balances a piano on your head, right? That just increases the amount of gravity that essentially you're being exposed to from the perspective that the piano is adding force, its own force into your system. And you know that's not going to be good for you. That's too much stress. But you put a dumbbell above your head instead, well, you know, as long as it's the right kind of weight and you do a few repetitions, well, that then creates stress in the system, but your body gets stronger. So, you know, there's always this trade-off between getting the right level of stress and getting too much.
Got it. So what you mentioned 6. So just quickly, stressors. There's the physical one. What are the 5 others?
Yeah, so you've got nutritional stresses. So again, too much or too little of any food is a problem,
right?
Potentially, and certainly the quality of the food obviously can impact on you if you're getting too much sort of food that stresses the system. And
Toxins.
Actually, it's quite it's quite interesting. You know, one of the tests that has been used clinically for decades is what's called the pulse test, and it's where you would literally you take someone's pulse clinically, and then you would expose them to the food that you suspect may be causing the allergy or the sensitivity in them. So, you know, it might be strawberries, it might be soya, it might be milk, you know, whatever you suspect. You know, normally the patient has a sense, but when I drink milk, I get a bit mucousy and I'm wondering if maybe I'm intolerant to it. You say, okay, right, well, let's just test your pulse. And here's a little glass of milk. So you have a sip. And if they take a sip and their pulse doesn't change, then that's negative. They probably don't have an intolerance to that milk. But if the pulse goes up, then that shows that the system has recognized that as a stressor, and the pulse has gone up as a result. So essentially you're going to a fight-flight state because you recognize that there's an invasion. So, you know, if you then put that into the context of, you know, the very high percentage of people that don't do great on grains and don't do great on wheat, especially, or gluten, and don't do great on dairy, and they're eating that every day, well, that's creating a huge nutritional stress on their system, which is present. You know, once you consume a food, it stays in your system for between 48 and 72 hours. So you just created stress for yourself for the next 3 days. So that's an example of a nutritional stress. Obviously, you know, other examples, things like alcohol is a stressor, and there's lots of things that potentially are stressors nutritionally. Then you've got chemical stresses. So, you know, chemicals in the environment, chemicals we put on our skin, we spray on our skin, we clean the house with, we breathe in, you know, we wash in, we wash our dishes in. You know, a lot of these things create stress. And, you know, I think one thing that's probably useful to discuss up front is that the body can, as we said, the body can handle a lot of stress. And so what I don't want to do is create a psychological stress by saying, oh, you got to change your shampoo and change your washing up liquid. You know, so that's another form of stress that you can get ideas. So that's the third one is, or fourth one is psychic stress or psychological stress. But, you know, the point is that what we can do is we can look at our lifestyle and say, okay, well, how am I eating? Am I eating foods that maybe I might be intolerant to? Do I bloat after I eat them? Do I get mucousy after I eat them? Do I get diarrhea when I eat them? And then you're like, well, yeah, maybe I should cut that out for a bit and just decrease the stress nutritionally on myself. Maybe, you know, next time you're at the supermarket and you want to get a washing up liquid, you look, well, there's the cheap one, which is full of chemicals. And then there's the natural one. It's a little bit more expensive, but it's going to just take the stress off my system a touch, you know? And the same with the shampoo and the deodorant and so on. You know, all of those cleaning type products and cosmetics, the more you can move towards a lower stress on the system, so much the better, you know? So that's what are we up to? 4 of them, I think. And I mentioned psychic, which is the 5th one. And then we've got, no, sorry, that was the 4th one. Psychic was the 4th one. Then we've got electromagnetic stress. Okay, and so of course, for a long time, people have talked about whether or not mobile phones are dangerous or Wi-Fi is dangerous and that kind of thing. And so that's probably the thing we often think about when people talk about electromagnetic frequencies and electromagnetic pollution. But of course, the sun's electromagnetic. The Earth itself is electromagnetic. Light is electromagnetic. So the point is, we're exposed to electromagnetic stressors, and the sun's a great example. If we get too little sun, we get unwell. We don't get enough vitamin D. It impairs our immune function, it impairs our blood sugar regulation, our sleep-wake cycles. But also, you get too much sun, well, then you start to get skin changes. You start to get, aging of the skin, premature aging of the skin. You can get skin cancers, those kinds of things. And so again, it's getting the right balance.
Right.
So electromagnetic stresses can be both positive and negative. And one of the concerns that's been touted around the COVID-19 is this idea of 5G coming online.
Yeah.
And this seeming kind of correlation between it coming online and people suffering with this flu-like disease. And of course, there's most of the authorities will say, well, there's no connection whatsoever. It's just wrong. But it is an electromagnetic stressor, which is going to impact on people's immune system. So whether or not it has any sort of direct relation to COVID-19 is largely irrelevant. It's still another stressor. And the challenge with anything like Wi-Fi, 5G, radio waves, those kinds of things, which are being pumped out by essentially, the infrastructure of society, is that you can't switch off from them. Mm. Because they're going the whole time. Now, of course, you can switch your own Wi-Fi off, but how about the flat below and the flat above and the next door neighbors and so on? It's very difficult to completely escape it. You can minimize it, not keeping your mobile phone in your pocket, keeping it away from the body a little bit during the day, turning the Wi-Fi off at night, that kind of thing. Those things can help to reduce electromagnetic stress on the system.
Yeah.
So, that's quite important. But, an interesting thing that ties in with that is that radiation, as in nuclear radiation, is also a stressor that we're well aware of. We've heard of Chernobyl and other, nuclear disasters and nuclear weapons and so on, and how that can create devastating impacts on human physiology and, animal and plant physiology as well. But the interesting thing here is that people that work in nuclear power plants actually have a lower level of cancer than the general population. And you think, whoa, that's bizarre. You'd think they'd have a higher level because they're exposed to more radiation. But this is what's known as a hormetic stressor. Okay, so exercise is a hormetic stressor. You do a certain amount of exercise, again, it's good for you. You do too much exercise, your body starts to break down. Okay, your hormonal system starts to collapse. You can't repair your tissues, and essentially, ultimately, you get an injury or you get some kind of chronic fatigue syndrome. Now, with working in a nuclear power plant, of course, what happens is you're going in for shifts of maybe 6 hours or 8 hours. So you're being exposed to that radiation at a higher level than the general population, but then you're getting out of there and you're having 16 hours a day and the weekends clear of that stress. So it actually stimulates the cells, just like a toxin might stimulate the cells slightly to get better at detoxifying. I think a lot of people have experienced this. If you drink alcohol regularly, which tends to be a pattern in Western culture as you go into adulthood, well, if you then have a break from alcohol and maybe 3 months later or 6 months later, whenever it is, you go back and have a drink, often you get a real bad hangover because your body's not used to processing it anymore. Yeah. You can't handle as much as you had before. So, there's always, again, this trade-off between getting the right amount and an appropriate amount, an amount your body can handle, and then overtaxing the system and actually creating a kind of fatigue-like state.
Got it. So we've got, let's hit these six stressors again from the top. We've got number 1 was physical. Number 2 is
nutritional.
Number 3,
chemical. Number
4,
psychic or psychological, which we didn't really dive into too much. That's really your field, even more than mine. But
well, we can take that at another time. We can have a whole, mini training about that's for sure.
Yeah, that's right.
What were the last 2?
Then we said electromagnetic frequencies or electromagnetic pollution. And then the last one, which we haven't talked about, let me just think, what is it? It's thermal.
Heat and
Thermal, yeah.
cold. Yeah.
Exactly, yeah. So if you and I are having this conversation and it's absolutely baking hot and you're trying to concentrate on what I'm saying, you're going to really struggle after a minute or two because the heat's just too much of a distraction, too much of a stress on your system. Similarly,
Got it.
if you're freezing and you're like, teeth are chattering and you're trying to listen, you won't be able to do it because the stress is too much.
Got it.
So you've always got other priorities.
So in these areas, in these 6 areas, we've got positive stress and negative stress, and we also talked about homeostasis.
Yeah.
And